My name is Ruth J. Dubstat, and I am 34 years old. I was still in the hospital on Christmas morning when the nanny called. I'd been there for 3 days already, hooked up to fluids and medication after a bad allergic reaction knocked me flat. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was serious enough that the doctors refused to discharge me until the swelling went down and my labs came back clean. I hated being there. I hated the beeping machines, the paper-thin blankets, and most of all, the guilt of not waking up at home with Tyler on Christmas. We'd planned for it, though. The nanny was reliable, someone Tyler trusted, and I'd left a detailed schedule taped to the fridge. He'd insisted he'd be fine. He was 10, fiercely independent, and proud of it. What he was most excited about wasn't presents for himself, but delivering the ones he'd bought for everyone else. He'd spent weeks carefully counting his allowance, asking me which wrapping paper looked the most festive, writing each name in his careful, uneven handwriting. I thought it was sweet. I thought my parents would think so too. So when the nanny called, I assumed she was just checking in. Her voice was hesitant, measured, like she was choosing each word carefully. She told me Tyler had put on his Christmas sweater, packed the bag of gifts he'd wrapped himself, and asked if she could drive him to my parents' house. I'd already told her it was fine. They lived a few blocks away. She said she stayed in the car while he ran up to the door, and then she paused. "I think something went wrong," she said. I asked her what she meant. She told me my mom opened the door, saw Tyler standing there in the cold, smiling and holding the bag. He said, "Merry Christmas," and started to tell her he had gifts for everyone. And my mom looked at him and said, "This year is just for family." Then she shut the door. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. I actually asked the nanny to repeat herself. She did. Tyler stood there for a few seconds, then turned around and walked back to the car. He didn't cry. He didn't argue. He just got in and held the bag on his lap. 10 minutes later, he walked into my hospital room with the nanny behind him. His cheeks were red from the cold, his expression confused, like he was still trying to understand what had happened. He handed me the bag and said quietly, "Grandma didn't want company." That was it. No accusations, no tears, just that sentence. The bag was still full, every gift untouched. Something for my mom, my dad, my brother Nick, his wife, even their kids, all wrapped in red paper that crinkled when Tyler squeezed it too hard. I sat there watching him play a game on my tablet, pretending everything was normal, while something inside me went very still. I didn't call my parents. I didn't text. I felt a cold clarity settle in, the kind that comes when a long pattern finally snaps into focus. 3 hours later, I sent one message. I won't be covering Nick's rent anymore. No explanation, no threats, just the truth. The calls started almost immediately. I didn't answer a single one. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and turned it face down. A month earlier, they'd begged me to help because Nick was 2 months behind on rent and about to be evicted. They said it would ruin his kid's Christmas. I paid the back rent and set up automatic payments. I'd spent more on their problems in the last year than on myself, and now they'd told my son he wasn't family. That was the moment everything changed. The first thing I did after sending that message wasn't dramatic. I didn't pace the hospital room or rehearse arguments in my head. I pressed the nurse call button and asked if I could be discharged early. She looked at my chart, hesitated, and asked if I was sure. I told her yes. I signed the forms, pulled on my clothes with hands that felt steadier than they had in days, and walked out with Tyler and the nanny trailing behind me. I thanked the nanny, paid her for the day, and told her to go home. She looked like she wanted to say something comforting, but she didn't. She just nodded and left us in the hallway. Tyler didn't ask questions. He held the bag of gifts between his feet like it was fragile and followed me to the car. We didn't go home. Not yet. I needed to see them. I needed to hear what they would say when the consequence was already set in motion. My parents' driveway was full when we arrived. Nick's SUV, my dad's truck, my brother's in-laws' car. So much for just family. The lawn was over-decorated like always. Plastic candy canes, inflatable characters sagging under their own weight, lights blinking out of sync. It looked like a place that promised warmth. I parked across the street and told Tyler we were only going in for a minute. He said okay and got out without hesitation. My mom opened the door with a smile that vanished the moment she saw us. She asked what we were doing there. I said we needed to talk. She didn't invite us in. She didn't even open the door wider. I stepped past her anyway and told Tyler to wait just inside. The living room was loud, wrapping paper everywhere, half-eaten cookies on paper plates, Nick's kids shouting somewhere down the hall. My dad came in from the kitchen holding a drink and looked annoyed, like we were an interruption. I asked them why they told my son to go home. My mom said they hadn't known he was coming, that they'd planned to keep things small this year. Her voice was clipped, already defensive. I asked if Nick's in-laws were part of that definition. She didn't answer. My dad said Tyler shouldn't have shown up unannounced and that the nanny should have checked first. I reminded him Tyler is 10 years old, and he came with a bag of gifts. My mom started explaining how they hadn't meant to hurt his feelings, that things had been stressful, that it wasn't personal. I asked her what part of closing the door on a child isn't personal. That's when she asked, like it was an unrelated detail, if I was really going to stop paying Nick's rent. I told her it was already done. The room went quiet. My dad tried to take control, asking if I'd thought it through, if I understood what this would do to Nick's family. I said I understood perfectly. Nick finally showed up then, angry and indignant, asking how I could do this on Christmas, saying I'd promised to help, saying his kids would suffer. Not once did he ask if Tyler was okay. Not once did he apologize. My mom raised her voice, saying family supports each other, that they'd helped me when I needed it, that this was cruel. I said leaving a 10-year-old on the porch in the cold was cruel. She said I was overdramatic, that I always twist things, that I was making myself the victim again. My dad told me to calm down and think about what I was doing. I looked over at Tyler. He was still standing by the door, holding the bag with both hands, not moving. That was enough. I told him we were leaving. He nodded. We walked out without another word. In the car, I asked if he still wanted to deliver the presents. He shook his head and said he just wanted to go home. After a pause, he asked if they were still our family. I told him we were still a family, just us. That was more than enough. The messages didn't stop that night. First frantic, then guilty, then angry. My dad left a voicemail saying I was overreacting and using Tyler as a weapon. At the end, he said the line they always saved. We helped you when you needed it. Don't forget that. 4 years ago, my SUV broke down at the worst possible time. Tyler had just been in urgent care, and the bills wiped me out. My parents paid for the repair and never let me forget it. From that moment on, it became leverage. Every time Nick messed up, they called me. Every time I said no, they reminded me. That night, I opened my laptop and went through every bank statement, every rent payment, every utility bill, every Venmo, over $18,000 in 2 years. I scheduled a transfer for exactly $3,000, the cost of that transmission, and sent it to my parents with the memo for the transmission. No more, no less. The silence that followed was loud. 3 days passed after I paid back the transmission, and not a single message came through. No acknowledgement, no apology, no attempt to talk about Tyler, just silence. I'd lived with their silence before, and I knew what it meant. It wasn't acceptance. It was regrouping. Nick was the first crack in the facade. He texted me late one evening, his tone clipped and bitter. He said Mom and Dad were furious, that they couldn't believe I'd embarrassed them on Christmas and then twisted the knife by cutting off the rent. He accused me of turning everyone against him, of making him look like a failure. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so predictable. I asked him one simple question. How many months are you actually behind? He didn't answer right away. When he did, it wasn't directly. His wife messaged me instead. We've never been close. She's quiet, careful, the kind of person who learns early that speaking up only makes things worse. Her message was short and unpolished, like she'd typed it with shaking hands. She told me she didn't agree with what my parents did to Tyler. She said she tried to stop them, but no one listened. Then she added the part that made my stomach drop. Nick wasn't 2 months behind. He was 3. He hadn't paid October at all, and they'd hidden it. The panic in November wasn't new trouble. It was old trouble they hoped I'd erase without asking questions. I went back through my bank app and matched dates. The payments I'd made only covered November and December. October had been left untouched, quietly buried under urgency and guilt. They didn't ask me to help because they were honest. They asked because they were desperate and betting I wouldn't look too closely. That was when the picture sharpened. This wasn't about one cruel Christmas moment. This was about a system that worked as long as I stayed silent and solvent. My parents protected Nick by enabling him. Nick relied on that protection, and I was the invisible support beam holding up the whole thing. The calls started after that. Extended family, people I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly wanted to check in. The language was always the same, concerned but pointed, gentle but judgmental. They'd heard things. They were worried. They hoped everything was okay. I could hear my parents' version of the story echoing through each call. Ruth's emotional. Ruth's overreacting. Ruth's punishing Nick for something small. I stopped answering. Nick tried again. This time it was a voicemail. He said his kids were scared. He said the landlord was calling. He said Mom and Dad were beside themselves. Then he said the line they always fell back on when logic failed. You're family. Act like it. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the entire message thread to his wife and wrote one sentence. I'm sorry you're in this, but I'm out. She reacted with a single thumbs-up emoji. Nothing else. It told me everything. The next day, my parents broke their silence. My mom sent a short message confirming they'd received the money. She said it wasn't necessary, but thank you. 5 minutes later came the real question. So are you planning to resume Nick's rent next month, or is this still about what happened on Christmas? Still about what happened on Christmas. I stared at that line until I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so revealing. They thought this was a tantrum, a phase, a misunderstanding I'd eventually get over once the guilt settled in. They didn't understand that something fundamental had shifted, that the door they slammed in my son's face closed more than a visit. It closed my willingness to keep sacrificing for people who wouldn't even protect him. I didn't reply. That night, I canceled the automatic payments. I removed my parents from every account they had access to, streaming services, cloud storage, grocery delivery. Every small thread I'd left connected out of habit. I opened the spreadsheet I'd started months ago and looked at the total again. It wasn't just money, it was years of emotional labor, of being the fixer so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. I sent one final message. I will not be providing any more financial support. This includes Nick, his family, or anything connected to him. I've paid back what I owed. Please don't contact me for money again. If Tyler isn't welcome in your home, neither am I. Then I turned my phone off. When I turned it back on 3 days later, there were messages waiting. Nick accused me of ruining his life. My dad warned me that anything that happened next would be on my conscience. My mom left a 3-minute voicemail that sounded calm until you listened closely. She talked about family, about loyalty, about all they'd done for me. She never mentioned Tyler, not once. That omission told me everything I needed to know. The quiet that followed felt different this time. It wasn't the tense silence of waiting for an argument to explode or the sulking quiet my parents used as punishment when they thought I'd misbehaved. It was thinner, more fragile, like the air after a storm when you're not sure if the clouds are done with you yet. Tyler seemed lighter without the constant undercurrent of tension, but I caught him watching me sometimes, like he was checking to see if I was still steady. That alone told me I'd made the right choice. My parents tried one more angle before they gave up on subtlety. It came through my dad, who had always been the quieter enabler, the one who didn't start the fires but never stepped in to put them out either. He left a voicemail late one night, his voice measured and tired, telling me he was disappointed in how things had turned out. He said my mother was beside herself, that Nick was spiraling, that the family was falling apart. Then he said the word they always used when they wanted to erase context and consequences. Family. He told me family meant sacrifice. He told me family meant showing up even when it was hard. He told me I was strong enough to carry more, like strength was an obligation instead of a capacity. He didn't mention Tyler. He didn't ask how my son was sleeping or whether he was still confused about why his grandparents shut him out. The absence was louder than anything else he could have said. I didn't call him back. The next attempt was less polite. My mother sent a message accusing me of tearing the family apart, of punishing Nick's children for something they didn't do. She said I was using Tyler as an excuse to justify cruelty. Reading it made my hands shake, not because I believed her, but because it was so familiar. Every time I tried to protect myself in the past, she reframed it as an attack. Every boundary became betrayal in her mouth. That was when it clicked fully. Family, to them, wasn't about care or protection. It was a lever. A word they pulled whenever they wanted me to fold, and I was done letting them use it. I wrote one last message, not angry, not pleading, just clear. I told them I wouldn't discuss money, Nick, or fixing things again. I told them contact going forward would only happen if it included Tyler and acknowledged what they'd done to him. I didn't expect a response. I didn't get one. The extended family noise flared briefly after that, a few cousins hinting that I was being harsh, that time heals all wounds, that children shouldn't be involved in adult conflicts. I stopped replying altogether. I realized I didn't owe anyone an explanation for choosing my son's safety over their comfort. The silence that settled afterward felt heavier, but also cleaner. There were no more surprises waiting on my phone, no sudden guilt bombs dropped in the middle of the day. Tyler asked fewer questions. He stopped watching the door. We built new routines in the empty space they left behind. I knew this wasn't reconciliation. It was something more final. And for the first time, that didn't scare me. The first real sign that things were unraveling didn't come from my parents or Nick. It came from someone else entirely. An old neighbor messaged me one afternoon to say she'd seen my mom at the grocery store and that she looked tired, not angry, not dramatic, just worn down in a way that suggested something heavy had finally settled on her shoulders. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. I already knew what the picture looked like when the spotlight turned off and there was no one left to perform for. Nick moved back in with my parents within a week. I found out the same way I found out everything else, through quiet, sideways comments from people who didn't want to be involved but couldn't help gossiping. His landlord hadn't been sympathetic. The grace period ended. The rent didn't appear. The eviction notice followed. My parents stepped in the way they always had, opening their doors and their wallets without ever addressing why the cycle kept repeating. This time, though, there was no safety net under them. No me, no automatic transfers, no last-minute rescues disguised as generosity. The house got quieter after that. My mom stopped posting on social media. My dad stopped going to church. The extended family stopped calling, not because they suddenly understood, but because there was nothing left to ask me for. The pressure evaporated when there was no one to squeeze. I realized then how much of my family's closeness had been fueled by access, not affection. Tyler noticed the difference long before I did. He slept better. He laughed more. He stopped asking if we were in trouble when my phone buzzed. One night, while we were folding laundry together, he asked if we were going to make new traditions now. I told him we already were. He nodded, like that made sense, and went back to carefully matching socks. Serious in the way kids get when they feel safe enough to be themselves. I didn't hear from my parents directly again. No apology, no explanation, just absence. At first it felt unsettling, like I was waiting for a door to slam or a final argument to break the quiet. But days passed, then weeks, and the silence held. Not the punishing silence they used to wield, but a distance that felt like a boundary finally being respected, or at least exhausted. I thought about everything I'd given over the years. The money, the time, the emotional labor. I thought about how easy it had been for them to call me selfish the moment I stopped giving, and how hard it would have been for them to say sorry to a 10-year-old. That contrast told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger needs something to push against. When the pressure stopped, the anger drained away with it. What replaced it wasn't happiness exactly, but steadiness. The kind of calm that comes when you stop trying to fix people who don't want to be honest. Stop! Part 6. Choosing what stays. A year passed quietly. No dramatic reunions, no tearful phone calls. My parents sold their house and moved into a smaller place 2 towns over. I heard it through a realtor who recognized my last name and asked, carefully, if I was doing okay. I said I was, and I meant it. Nick stayed with them for a while, then drifted off again, chasing the next opportunity, the next excuse. We spoke once, briefly, not to argue, not to reconcile, but to acknowledge that things were different now. He sounded older, tired, like someone who had finally run out of people to blame. I wished him well and didn't offer help. That was new for both of us. My life settled into something smaller but stronger. Tyler and I started a Sunday night ritual without planning it. We'd pick a recipe, usually something simple and messy, and turn the kitchen into chaos. Flour on the counters, music playing too loud, laughing when things went wrong. No one was turned away. No one had to earn their seat at the table. Sometimes I wondered what my parents said about me now. I imagined versions where I was cold, ungrateful, dramatic. I imagined them telling people I'd changed, that motherhood had made me unreasonable. I didn't lose sleep over it. The truth didn't need defending anymore. The people who mattered could see it, and the ones who couldn't were no longer my responsibility. One night, Tyler asked if we were still a family. I told him yes. We always had been. Family isn't the people who demand your sacrifice and call it love. It's the people who make room for you without conditions. It's the ones who don't shut doors when you show up with gifts and hope. I didn't walk away from my parents out of spite. I walked away because staying meant teaching my son that love comes with humiliation and strings attached. I chose differently for him, and for me. Some endings aren't loud. They don't come with speeches or revenge or reconciliation. Some endings arrive quietly, in the space where obligation used to live, and leave behind something better. Peace, clarity, a life that finally belongs to you.